Okay, folks, next one up. This is like a magic thing, I gotta tell you. I love how you all get quiet. Okay, our penultimate panel. I thought that would be a good way to put it. Artificial Intelligence meets Tin Pan Alley. This is a panel that is going to be moderated by John Biter of John Biter Law Firm PLC, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to him to introduce you to the rest of the panel. To you, sir.
All right, thank you very much. I'm not there, I'm here. But in any case, let's go ahead. I want to start by introducing the panel, which is usually the case. But before I even do that, I'd like to get some show of hands so we can understand who the audience is today. How many of you are songwriters? Couldn't afford it. Okay. Okay. How many are music publishers? Or work it for music publishers, okay? How many are lawyers? I had a funny feeling about that. And other people in the business generally? Okay. And if any of you are in the wrong room, you can stick around if you like. It's going to be interesting. And this, we think, is a really sort of cutting edge, if not existential issue at the moment. There are, machine-generated songs that machines generating songs, is that a tool for songwriters, or is that competition to songwriters? And what does it have to do with the music industry as it stands now? Because this is not a future issue. It's a topic for now because the business is happening and these songs are being generated and used. So let me just go ahead and introduce the panel. At the far end, it's really an honor to have on the panel today Reagan Smith. She is the General Counsel at the Copyright Office and the Associate Register of Copyrights of the Copyright Office. In essence, she is the top copyright lawyer in the United States. Don't want to embarrass you. But in any case, it's wonderful to have her here because this gets into copyright, issues of copyright. The statute says what it says. How does that apply to the new world of machine-generated songs? So she's speaking on her own behalf and on behalf of the Copyright Office. Okay, let me get down. Okay, so next to Reagan is Shannon Sanders. He's locally in the music industry, although what he does is on a national level. He's a songwriter, he's a producer, he's an artist. He's worked with other artists like India Arie, Johnny Lang, John Legend, on and on and on and on. He happens to be a two-time Grammy winner. He happens to be a two-time Emmy winner. He's also won a Dove Award. And I've just got to throw this in. He also has a radio station here in town, 102.1, the Ville, and it's the coolest radio station in town. Check it out while you're here.
When you see it.
If your head's in the wrong place, just listen to a little of that and it'll be in the right place. Next, we have Alex. Alex Mitchell, who is the founder and CEO of a company called Boomy. And Boomy is, I will read the description, a company using artificial intelligence to create what the company calls instant music. He is a self-pronounced serial music entrepreneur, previously founded a company called Audio Kite Research, which was a marketing research company that ultimately was sold to Reverb Nation a few years ago. And last but not least, going back to identify Alex, you say you are a musician and are a songwriter as well? Okay. And last but not least, to my very right is Margie Evans. She's a music publisher in Nashville at Do Right Music. They do music publishing and publishing administration. Songs recorded by such artists as Toby Keith, Blake Shelton, Luke Bryant, Christina Aguilera. You get the picture. They've got a lot of action. Margie has sort of an international background in music publishing. She, in the music industry, among other things, she has been the head of video rights and clearances at Universal Pictures, and spent some time on the Scepter Dial working for Polygram Filmed Entertainment in the UK. And of course, she's a singer-songwriter as well. So everyone on this panel is very much interested in music, having been a fan forever and also having pursued the avocational profession for a long time. So I was going to play a song that some of you might have heard about before. It's called Daddy's Car. Does anybody know what Daddy's Car is? You can go to YouTube and listen to it sometime. It's a song that it purports to be, quote, in the style of the Beatles. And it was written by artificial intelligence. I think some people might take issue about how much human input there was, but essentially AI-generated song that you can listen to on YouTube. And by gosh, it's a song, and it's about 3 minutes long, and it's a recording of a song. And if you didn't know better, you might think it had something to do with the Beatles. Is it Beatlesque? That's in the ear of the beholder. But in any case, it just points out that there are songs out there now in public being used, listened to, and business done about that were written by artificial intelligence algorithm, a machine, and the music business has to deal with this. So the first thing we like to do is have Alex just explain to us on a 101 layman's basis, not getting into the details, but what is, for those of us who don't know, what is artificial intelligence and how does it go about writing songs?
Sure,
I
absolutely.
thought people in rooms with guitars did that.
Yeah. So what is artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence, it's a tough question because it's not really anything. It's a little bit of a buzzword that applies to, broadly to a set of machine learning technologies. Machine learning is also a little bit of a buzzword. We're talking about data processing, right? We're talking about a system, the concepts of which are maybe 10 to 20 years old, that can take structured data and that can create algorithms out of that structured data for specific purposes. Identifying cats tends to be the canonical thing that people talk about in 101. If you want a computer to know what a cat is, what you can do is you can feed a machine learning algorithm lots of pictures of cats identified, hey, this is a cat, this is not a cat. You can train a model, and then eventually, when you show it a new picture, you can say, is there a cat in this picture? It will be able to identify it, and then you can take it one step further, and you can say, hey, make me a cat, now that you've looked at all these cats.
But ultimately,
neural networks and things like that.
Ultimately, unlike a computer program that you throw a bunch of data into and you ask a question, you get an answer, this has the learning
right.
element.
Right, so every time it's fed a new picture of a cat, and it says, yes, there's a cat here, and here's where I think it is. If you have a system that says, yes, that's a cat, no, that's not a cat, eventually that system becomes better. It sort of learns from itself. That's how a neural network works. I think when we say artificial intelligence, and when you hear me say things like Boomi's artificial intelligence, we use that as a blanket term because there are many different things that happen in these processes, some of which have to do with machine learning, some of them are traditional ways of creating algorithms and different kinds of math. You can get pretty far into simple regression, but when it comes to music, we've built a system that composes, produces, and post-produces a song in 9 seconds, and that whole process is what I consider to be our AI because it's multi-stage.
Okay, so in short, how is it that an algorithm comes to write a new song?
So I think it comes down to the fact that it's any kind of structured data can work very well in a machine learning environment. And music, happens to be, particularly compositional data, happens to be a form of structured data, right? And so this is something that I think people have been looking at a lot for a very long time. Recently, it's been much easier to use this technology because of the cloud providers and some of the subsidization that they've created. So it's you've got MIDI and you've got structured data. you can have a machine learning process look for patterns in specific kinds of MIDI files, and then you can say, just like identifying a cat, or just like make me a cat, identify, is this a note, or make me a new string of notes. There are codified rules of music theory. There are rules outside of traditional music theory that people are using in popular styles. A machine learning algorithm can digest that, and it can see and find the patterns that a human songwriter also kind of does, but in a more structured way. Is
So-
the best way I could say it. Our data scientists would hate
So
me
how
for
does
trying
this
to
boil down
explain
into a
this.
business model for companies like yours and other companies out there?
Sure.
I read that in some cases the low-hanging fruit is often licensing incidental production music that's created by a machine into audiovisual works that
Yeah.
are therefore or arguably royalty-free, maybe royalty-free. What's the market? What's the business model, in short?
I love that question because it's what we spend every day worrying about and trying to figure out. I'm not deluded into thinking there is a gigantic existing market for weird robot beats today. I think the notion that like artificial intelligence is invading the music industry or other industries is a little bit overhyped and a little bit overblown because fundamentally we're trying to figure that out. We're trying to solve a market problem. Different AI music companies treat this differently. I can tell you how Boomy thinks about it. We don't wake up every day asking ourselves, how do we make the best possible music with AI? We are coming at this from a perspective where it's not about technology, it's about accessibility. It's about the fact that music making is still this really, really hard thing that's expensive, that takes a lot of time and resources, and the majority of people, even if they have some latent creativity, just like guitar's too hard. Even Fruity Loops is too hard in some cases to create great works. And so machine learning is interesting to us, artificial intelligence is interesting to us, to the extent that it can help somebody who has latent creativity express it, or maybe doesn't have the physical ability to create music, can express it and experience the joy of making music, not just in creating the song and seeing it come to life, but even distributing it to Spotify and earning royalties on that. So this is where some of the issues around copyright and ownership of works that are created by our users, in the system that we've created, which has a machine learning component, a machine composition component to it. This is where we're trying to figure out what the best legal framework for us is to accomplish that.
Well,
that goal.
let's get into this topic now. So we're talking about, let's just in the short term say machines writing songs. Anybody in the business understands that when you're talking about songs, you quickly come to the topic of copyright. And as I understand it, with artificial intelligence, there's sort of a sliding scale of how much human input there is involved in the creation of these songs. I'm speaking broadly now, but as I understand it, you can go from a human putting in all kinds of criteria. I want a slow song. I want in a minor key. It's about death, and I like the word Albert in it. And that's human input. But that's one end of the scale. And the other end of the scale might be play a song or create a song that I like based upon all the data you have on me. So there is this sliding scale, as I understand it, of human input, and that brings us to basic copyright issues. Because, if we could get just, Reagan, if you could just tell us just briefly, like Copyright 101, what is the basis for copyright protection?
So the theory of our copyright law comes out of the Constitution, the Progress Clause, to promote the progress of science and the useful arts. And the Supreme Court in 1879 said this is to protect sort of the intellectual fruits of the mind. And the Copyright Office has taken that in subsequent Supreme Court and similar decisions and deduced that there's really the theory of authorship would require a human to be executing a decision behind that. And that doesn't mean that the human cannot be using a variety of assistants or tools or devices or computers or any of that in order to create authorship. But there's only a copyright interest if there is an author, and an author, I think, as our body of law has created it, ultimately resolves to a person, or a person who has, done this in the scope of their employment for a corporation.
So if we get to a point with artificial intelligence having minimal human input in generating a song, it's the Copyright Office position that that's not sufficient for copyright protection?
So, I'm a little skeptical, or at least unaware of whether in all situations it is the case. I think there's a lot of debates among AI as to where I think humans could be putting their mark on a work, right? It could be through training the machine or devising the algorithm. A lot of works in the 70s, for example, in fine arts and photos were there of you'd use this machine to create a painting in the style of a specific fine art author, and in that case, that might be enough of a direction so that the outputs are still attributable to the fine artist. On the other hand, works could come out, and I don't know if this is true of Boomi's works, but it sounds like some of them, where you're like, I like that, but let's change this a little bit, and there's editing at the end, and I think that's certainly sufficient. And if there's something in between where it's literally just a black box, I think, yes, hypothetically, no copyright would attach to it. But I don't, I think it was interesting that you said there's a lot of buzzwords and a lot of, confusion over what these things mean right now, too. So I do think that it's a little bit important to be specific about how the technology of things work in order to determine whether, for each specific work, who is the copyright owner, if there's a copyright owner.
So, the fertile minds of lawyers and business types, there have been a lot of people positing who might be the author of a song that arguably, let's say, there was de minimis human input. I said, write a song I like. And that's not sufficient for sufficient for a copyright for the machine. According to the Copyright Office, machines can't have copyrights. But we've still got a galaxy of people who might arguably claim some copyright. What about the idea that the person who created the algorithm might have some copyright interest in the resulting song? I just read an article the other day about a company that is, generating AI, generated music, is licensing it to a third party, and the question came up when they were filling in all the blanks on all the metadata, who do we put down as the songwriter here? And what this company decided to do was to list all of the employees of the company as the songwriters.
I can chime in and say that is our position as well.
Okay. So in other words, the algorithm, the theory, whether it would be upheld by the Supreme Court or not, the theory being that the person who generated the algorithm that generated the song has a copyright interest, an authorship stake in the resulting song because of the algorithm. What about other theories? The person who owns the software, I bought this software, I bought this algorithm, and therefore anything that comes of it I own, or the person who owns the hardware. I've got this machine in my office here cranking out songs all day that I paid good money for. I own the machine. It's generating the songs. What about the person who is inputting something to some extent that might rise to the level of copyright authorship?
Yeah, the Supreme Court has said that photographs are copyrightable. There's a case where there's a photograph of Oscar Wilde, and the photographer who set the stage and chose what was going to be in it, although he himself did not press the shutter, was the author and had a copyright interest. There's other cases where you can describe the details of a map, and someone can dictate that for you and write it down, and that doesn't take away your authorship. And then an interesting case that I think might be, it's questionable how much it would apply now is an early 80s video game case where the Third Circuit, Seventh Circuit, said that the video game developer owns the output from a video game because the choices are sort of constrained by that program. Now, that might be different now that we're in a world where you have Minecraft, which has sort of a coding element, and the person playing it might be making their own choices over what to build. And it could be that there's, sort of dual or neither. It probably is very specific as to what is going on in each case. It almost reminds me of when social media was created. There was a lot of discussions like, what is social media law? And then it was like, it's just law like applied to social media. And you can sort of be the judge of how well that has worked, a decade or so later. But in the beginning, when you're trying to figure out with an emerging technology how to deal with it, I think it's valuable to apply existing principles. And in the case of authorship and joint authorship and contributions, we have sort of a rich history of this law and ways of thinking about it as new technologies emerge.
So the overarching theme of this panel is going to be that this is business that's being conducted at the moment, and the law is not definitive about authorship issues. The Copyright Office has taken a definitive stance. The Ninth Circuit has. In the monkey selfie case, I think most of you know about the monkey selfie case, the Ninth Circuit upheld a ruling that in essence said that non-human animals cannot have copyright. But I've got to ask Shannon, how would you feel about, how do you feel as a living, breathing songwriter, how do you feel about the idea of using artificial intelligence as a real songwriting tool, almost as a collaborator? Like giving you, why don't you try this rhyme instead of that rhyme? Why don't you go to these changes instead of those changes? A machine telling you.
Well, you know what? We've been doing that for a long time anyway. We've had, even before technology played a part in that, we all had rhyming dictionaries. We all had, as real songwriters, we all had our favorites. I had 4 or 5 rhyming dictionaries. Because, and that's the thing, is that we've always had our tools. And so it's an interesting time. And at whatever point we started to have this conversation, it really sent me down a rabbit hole of research and really a lot of introspective thinking about exactly what you just asked me. Like, how would I feel about truly collaborating with a machine, not telling it what to do, but telling it what I would want it to give back to me as much as I would a songwriting partner, almost asking it what it thinks. Like you said, to give it keywords or to give it a mood description, tempo description, key, chords, those kinds of things, and to see what it comes back with, and we had a chance to talk. Honestly, at this point in the game, I embrace it because I see it as a tool. It does get scary when you think about it, maybe replacing us, but I'm not intimidated by that. By that, I really feel like as a creator, I say all the time that what makes us unique are our experiences. You can have a twin, and you fall down and scuff your knee, but your twin doesn't. But that's your experience now. So I always say that our experiences are the fingerprint of our soul, and that's the same thing. I feel like our art is in the same way, fingerprint of our soul. So to create in that way, I definitely see it as a tool. I see it as something that can contribute. I don't see it as replacing us.
Well, to take it a step farther, not talking about copyright principles, but how would you feel about giving a co-write credit to an algorithm?
I wouldn't want to do that, but at the same time, but you know what? You made a good point. So watch this, and so you said that you guys share a similar stance about the employees of that particular company taking songwriting credit. But think about that though. You're talking about a particular set of songs that they generated. So if I've got the software and I press enter, then I feel like it's mine at that point.
And to be clear, I don't know that it's an ideal solution. What it is it's an attempt to take the law as it stands today and apply it to this thing that we're doing that is a little bit new when it comes to specifically the songwriting question. I think less so when it comes to the production question. But I think you said something really important in that a lot of this is not new. Like like a delay pedal that has a randomizer setting is, and you play your guitar through it, and it repeats notes in a very specific way. That is, would you share authorship with the delay pedal? Like, probably not. Should you? Maybe, because it's contributing to the composition, right? I think we're seeing technologies now that were disparate, that were plugins, that were different pieces that people were putting together, but still automating parts of it. Things like auto-tune, things like randomizers, and things like 808s. And now we've just figured out how to put it all into one button and automate a lot of that stuff, right? So I don't think it's actually hugely new. The thing that's new is the arrangement of it, right? And we consider the things that Boomy creates, arrangements in some ways, more so than we think of them as necessarily original compositions every time. But the reason why I'm being sort of vague about this is because it depends on the model. We have different ways of creating music that are different depending on what style or what the user wants to do. And so I think it is very case specific how some of this stuff should get attributed.
Well, I've got to ask Margie this as well. She's a music publisher. Beyond the copyright issues for a moment, how would you feel about, the idea of publishing a song that arguably was co-written by a machine?
Well, the scenario would be someone would come to me and say, listen to all this stuff my computer is made up, and I think, oh, that's great, I think I can place that, and we'd do a deal. But that's under the existing law. So I assume how slowly things went with the MMA, that I would have enough time to make my money back before the laws would change and say you can't own a computer-generated song. It's public domain. And, you have to think long-term. That's what I would say. But I'd be happy to treat the person who owns the machine as the songwriter and be the publisher.
So going back to Reagan, what about some alternative theories of copyright under the law as it presently is? For instance, have you ever heard the argument that somehow a song written by an algorithm is a derivative work of the algorithm?
Yeah, I think it's technology specific. If you take if the only input is like Abbey Road and you come out with a Beatles-esque song, I think you're going to have some serious questions whether that is derivative of some of that work, and the copyright law already provides for that. And so I think there could be infringement concerns. There's also, I think, Authors Guild, I know, has suggested that just using a lot of literary work for training, and I think this is, a question of debate, broadly now, might be something that should require some compensation, versus others are saying this is for a different purpose and it should be fair use. So it probably depends upon what the inputs are and what comes out, how closely it's tracking to the original works that were used. And that's, our infringement test. You look at, do you have access? In this case, it seems like in a lot of cases, access is going to be pretty easy to prove, but maybe not if it's, gigantic data sets mediated through these neural networks. And then similarity, and we have a bodies of law to deal with whether songs are substantially similar or not.
What about AI-generated songs as works for hire, which, by the way, would mean that, let's say a corporation employs somebody to do this, and under the copyright law, the corporation, which is not a human, is considered the author of that work. So we've already got sort of a non-human entity that is considered for copyright purposes the author of.
Corporations were people. Didn't Mitt Romney
They're
say
persons,
that?
but they're not people. They hire a lot of people. But in any case, so if a non-human entity can be the author of a work for purposes of work for hire, and you can explain what that is to people who don't know, why is the machine that actually generates that song, why can't that be an author?
I mean, I think Margie's right. I think that the state of our law confers a personhood on corporations in these certain situations. And so the work for hire doctrine is codified in the Copyright Act, which is something different. And so it has a list of enumerated ways under which a work may be a work for hire for a corporation or an employee creating work in the scope of his or her employment. And I mean, these are personhood concepts, I think, to have an employee, which would be what is most relevant here. Now, that may allow what an employee needs to do to create a copyrightable work is a relatively low bar, right? The amount of creativity required for a copyright interest to accrue is minimal, but it is there. And so I think that's just how our law is set up, that a corporation can be an author, but not necessarily a computer without a human behind it.
But in terms of the actual work for hire, this was generated on behalf of someone. The language of the copyright statute doesn't quite fit that circumstance when we're talking about artificial intelligence generating songs. But you know, would it make sense to even think in those terms and subject the definition of work for hire to some tweaking? If the concept generally makes sense, that is, this was generated for, you know, as something like an employee or commissioned, and it happened to be a machine that generated it.
I mean, I think that could be a way to change the law if we wanted to, but I think we'd want to think carefully whether that would be desirable. I think you wouldn't want to have to share ownership with, you know, instruments that everyone already relies upon. That might not be valuable, and what would we be doing if we were changing that? But we may have to think through those things. And I think some of these questions have been around for a long time, so figuring out whether the law is enduring or not is definitely a fair question.
I think I can tell everybody in the room, certain people know this by heart, but when someone has a great idea about changing the copyright statute, it may be a great idea. The thing is that you're opening the door to every other person that has other thoughts, other interests, contrary interests possibly, and so the process itself becomes extremely complicated, extremely quickly. So getting on. So we've got these, you know, what is AI and how does a machine generate songs, and we've got the copyright issues, which are just, I would argue, just are not resolved. It's open territory. Everybody's got a theory of who the author is. Everybody's got all kinds of theories about how does one license property when you don't know what the chain of title is. So why don't we now get to the conversation of how this affects sort of creatively, philosophically, on a real nuts and bolts business level, the music industry at this point, the structures that are in place that function today in the music industry, specifically the music publishing industry, where, Margie, could you start off by just telling us in really basic terms, what is the business proposition in the songwriting music publishing world? What is the basic relationship contractually, and how does it come about?
What, between the
Songwriter and the publisher.
any songwriter, not between the AI?
No, any songwriter and any publisher, how does it work? The songwriter walks in one day and has a song that the publisher likes. then
Right,
what?
and so it's my team's job to make sure that every entity that pays songwriters, no matter how small a piece of the pie, gets the ownership information. So there's another part of the AI. What's embedded on those AI things as to the ownership?
Quite a bit. I mean, to the extent that we can, and I do want to amend one thing that we keep saying here, which is machine-generated music or AI-generated music. I've never seen it. I don't know that that's ever existed. That like a machine woke up one day and said, "What I would like to do as a machine is write a song." It is always from people, right?
There is
I think, but I think automation, right, which is the scary thing that is coming to every industry, including music, is the thing that kind of raises eyebrows. I mean, we've been running Boomi in a very limited beta for the last 2 months, and we've had about 80,000 songs that have been generated by our users, right? we consider every single one of those songs to be a work of human authorship because they would not exist without the input of the person, right? So I think there's the law on fully machine-generated works, if there's no person involved at all, is very clear.
Right. There are
You
certain
can't
people
copyright
that speak in this
But-
space who say that there is
Yeah.
no way as you said, there's always human input, and so it is never a strictly machine-generated song, but we are including songs that may not have enough human input to create authorship in a human for copyright purposes, but is it not coming to the day when there is so de minimis human input? Like I said,
Well, I guess what I was trying to get at was the metadata is when the song is streamed, that is what generates who gets the money for it. So I was just kind of asking on the side, and that metadata has the writer and the publisher and the ISRC number and everything else that goes on it. So that's the relationship really between publisher, writer is generating income from that. But if an AI song falls outside of copywriters, then, who gets the money? It's the person who owns the recording. It opens up a lot of questions, and I don't think music publishers are going to become obsolete. It's just another, it's just an alternative way of producing music, as far as I'm concerned.
So opening this up to everybody in the panel, if you want to speak, what happens then in the normal publishing relationship that Margie speaks to? There is we think we know, at least somebody is stepping forward saying that they are the author. It's a human being, and so there's a contract between the publisher and the songwriter, which, among other things, includes the financial proposition. I'll pay you if I'm a nice person, a nice publisher, I'll pay you in advance against future royalties, and I will pay you royalties, you person. But there's also sort of reps and warranties about the genesis of this song. I, human songwriter, warrant and rep that I wrote this song. And what do you do in that situation when, the copyright, the ownership based on authorship is like an open question? Like, how do you have contracts about songs when the authorship is not a legally definite thing?
Well, you know what? I look at it like any other software. If I've got Pro Tools, I don't have DigiDesign coming after me for every song, that I write and produce using the software. So I feel like if I own this software or if I license or subscribe to this software, then whatever comes from that is mine. That's how I feel. And then, but you know what? You bring up another interesting point, like something you just said. Think about this. You've been in beta 2 months, right? And I went to your website too. They've been in beta 2 months and they've generated 80,000 songs in 2 months. And so from what I read, that says that accounts for 0.9% of all recorded music. In 2 months, you've already generated the equivalent of 0.9% of all recorded music in 2 months. Well, but like you said, it's not all good, but it's coming. It's coming. And let's just be honest. This technology is just going to get better. And so I think that it's important that we definitely figure out which side of the bar ownership falls on for us as creators. But at the same time, it's just watering down the pool. Because think about that. Like when you talk about this relationship between we as writers and publishers, it's Nashville. We get down. You might write a song in the morning, and then we might go to lunch, and then you come back, you might write one in the afternoon. Man, just think about the fact, like what he just said about automation just sent me down a whole other thing. You can go to sleep at night and automate this thing. You might wake up in the morning and it's written 100 songs for you, and then do these go to your catalog. And what happens once these get good? Like he's saying, we're only maybe a year away from being able from it getting really good. Think about how far video games have come in the last 10 years, just in terms of the technology, just in terms of, I'm thinking about how they'll bring a football player in, right? And they put the nodes or the things on you, right? So they mimic every movement that particular player makes. They have him come into a room and there's a green screen. Every twitch of his muscle, everything that it does it mimics. They don't need him anymore at that point. And then it's just how great are the graphics. But
On that point, I was going to ask, does anybody, hear or think of an argument that if you were telling this machine to write in the style of...
exactly. So
is there a
right.
copyright infringement issue in that you're literally inputting the entire body of work of this songwriter, let's say, and this machine is generating things that sound like that? Is there not a potential infringement issue there, I wonder?
I mean, I think there's been sound-alike infringement issues going on for a
Bette
long
Midler
time
cases
for
and all those, yeah.
copyright, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have Eminem is just one something, you have the Black Keys on a copyright issue, and you also have right of publicity issues with, Bette Midler or Tom Waits and a lot of in the style of type of things. And I think those doctrines would still apply. And the question would be, the same question too in terms of paying, is whether somebody who's trying to control the fixation of the work has enough of a, kind of decision-making input to be afforded an author. And if not, there's a lot of other and I think in most cases, probably, given the technology we have now, the answer is probably yes in one way or the other. But in some cases, if the answer is no, then I think it would be treated, in the case of songwriting, like a public domain work, which, we have a functioning public domain.
So getting back to another sticky business issue, I think somebody I read in one of these articles I have up here called it a complete clusterfest, something like that. What about licensing to third parties? I'm the publisher and I claim to have these rights because I got a piece of paper from the songwriter saying I do. Although I know that somehow or other artificial intelligence was involved, let's say hypothetically to a great extent in the creation of this song, and I am now in a position, some third party out there wants to use this song for some purpose. Am I going to be uncomfortable? What am I going to do? I want to do a deal. That's what I do as a publisher. I do deals like that, licensing deals. But am I not a little bit concerned about like what I'm repping and warranting again to that third party about where the copyright resides? Or, is it, if it's not in the machine, is it, as that company I was telling you about, sort of placing the songwriting credit on the people that generate the algorithm? And I'm the publisher of this song, and I am telling, some big international movie conglomerate that you've got all the rights you need from me in this song when these issues have not really been resolved yet. Does the person who generated the algorithm or somebody else have a stake in the authorship and ownership of the song? What do you do in the meantime? Because business is happening today. And anybody who's got a thought down the line.
I think it's a little more answered. I do think there are aspects of current law, and we had to go through this. I mean, we had to hire the right attorneys who've given us a framework and given us what we believe is a very strong legal foundation, not only to retain the ownership of songs created on Boomi, but also grant that ownership. And we have legal agreements in place. So one of the models we're experimenting with, and we may or may not change this in the future, but we own what gets made by default on the platform. Our users can buy that ownership from us for $20. So if you want to come in and use a beat, right, or lay something down or use ideas and you find something that's really good, we kind of have this very binary position of like, we grant you a license to use some things for free, but in your case, because you're a songwriter and you might have to run into some of those contractual issues that you brought up, here it is, it's yours, take it, do whatever you want with it, take the MIDI, take the stems, that's how we're kind of accounting for that.
So you're saying on a contractual basis, we as the
Yep.
AI company are going to give you a piece of paper that says you own
It's-
this to
yep.
the extent there's any question about some other person or thing, we'll give you a piece of paper saying that you own it.
We actually
which
literally
gets them
send
covered.
a DocuSign or a signed request
Okay.
to, transferring the title and ownership. So, yeah.
So look, I got a question. And so now here's the thing, and that's assuming that only we as professional songwriters use this technology. What about the layman?
Right.
What about kids sitting up at lunchtime and they make crazy beats and somebody hears this beat and wants to use it? See, it opens it up to everybody. It's awesome. But at the same time, it's like, where does that fall? You know what I mean? Like at that point, anybody, like at that point, like you may be, as a music publisher, you might be signing descriptors. You might be people who are really good at putting in descriptions of songs. You know, they may have figured it out. I got a buddy that's figured out a workaround for Facebook ads. It's the craziest thing, but he's figured out this thing, right? Somebody figures out these descriptors and says, okay, E minor with this, and this key is happy, and this and that, and they figure something out, and they're cranking out hits. And then there you go. And so it's that person that may not really be a writer, but they're just the perfect descriptor. So that opens us up to a future music business as well, you know. And we talked about this earlier, you know, we might be entering a time where we might have to blow a lot of this up, you know, because technology is changing the game so fast, you know, by the time this technology comes about, and then we try to apply it to current copyright law and figure out where it stands, it's down the road. Like technology has moved down the road even from that point. And so, you know, we might be looking at a new framework of the business as we move into these conversations.
So I was going to say and then there's the pizza delivery guy who comes to the studio and gets a 20th of a songwriter credit. But that's a different topic for a different day. But I want to ask Reagan, you know, I would think that there's some question in the idea of getting a piece of paper saying you are the owner, because that's, at the end of the day, predicated on somebody else's ownership, and it's ultimately a legal issue, is it not?
Ownership, yeah.
It's in the form, I mean, most copyright assignments that I see are in the form of something like a quitclaim. Mm-hmm. I'm giving you everything I have, every stake of ownership I have in this song, whatever that is. So, in any case, but again, so the business is happening now, and these like fundamental copyright questions that used to not be so fundamental. Yes, somebody might lie about having written a song, but generally, you see the person. They're banging it out in your office until you have to ask them to leave. You know who that person is, and it's not these issues of authorship. There always are issues of authorship, but not as between humans and machines. Those are not issues that have been worked out. Thank goodness for the Copyright Office to have given some clarity to this issue by stating its position. There's got to be human input. There's got to be sufficient original creativity inputted by a human, or there is no copyright. But it's happening now in the business, and it just seems to me to be a big issue in terms of just getting rights from songwriters or licensing rights to third parties. The business goes on, and it's somewhat unclear.
Well, can I just say something? When I was working at Polygram Filmed Entertainment in the 90s, Polygram was owned by Philips, and Philips and Sony both developed the CD, and they get a penny each get a penny for every CD ever sold because they invented it. So when we were doing DVD, before DVD was a thing, and it was going from videotape to eventually a DVD, the amount of collusion between the major companies on exactly what to sell them for, whether they could have ads on them, what needed to be cleared, and working with the unions, because at first the extra features were supposed to be thrown in, then the actors got upset, so then they had to pay them for the extra features. So I imagine the big companies will all get together and decide what's going to happen with these AI machines.
Seems to be the way of the world. Moving to maybe a last business question that really gets into philosophical issues. So let's assume, for purposes of discussion, that a machine basically does write a song lock, stock, and barrel. We may not be there technologically yet. Let's assume that happened. That is the case shortly, for purposes of discussion. Okay, and so, and what if these machines get to a place where qualitatively, there's no distinction, at least to the person on the street. I can't tell a song written by a human from a song written by a machine. Or if I'm of the generation that lives in Fortnite every day of my life, maybe I still can tell, but I don't care. It matters not to me if it was written by a human there's no premium on that to me as the younger generation of music consumers. Is there any value added that a publisher can say, can a songwriter or a publisher say to the world out there, well, there is something, I mean, there are arguments that the creativity level will never be as high from machines as humans because there is that emotional thing that humans feel that machines don't, and so songs will always be qualitatively different. And I don't reject that argument, but let's just assume for a second that to the average person on the street, I can't tell the difference. We were talking in the green room, you know, I like to buy guitars. I like to buy vintage guitars. Why? Because I know that somebody wrapped that wire around the magnetic pole, and, you know, I like that, and supposedly it sounds better. But to tell you the truth, can I tell the difference in my ears between a machine-wound pickup or a human-wound pickup? I can't. I just can't. So if there's no qualitative difference, is there some other distinction that makes a human-written song valuable and certified with a stamp, human-written song? Is there some other thing about it, the fact that it's human, distinguishing it because I'm another human being, and I just like that? You know, I like handcrafted jewelry instead of machine-crafted jewelry. Why? Because I can't tell the difference, really, but I like the idea, and I'm willing to pay a premium for it. Is that a valid distinction if we ever get to the place where qualitatively, unless you're an expert, you really can't tell the difference? And as I said, with the younger people, do they even give a damn if they can tell the difference? I'd just like to hear some thoughts just quickly down the road, because we want to take a couple of questions at least. If it just gets down to the difference is this song was written by a human being, and that's enough difference to me.
I think it's a matter of taste. You know, you may like that handcrafted jewelry because if you like it because it's human, then that means you like the flaws, because we're flawed, because you want to see human in it. That's why. But if you don't like the fray, you might like that. Like, honestly, a lot of the music we hear, especially in EDM, you're hearing it's accurate. That's what you're hearing, is accuracy. And a lot of people like accuracy in everything and that sort of detail. So again, like, you know, you go and you listen to old records, man, you might hear, you know, back before auto-tune, man, you're gonna listen to some of the great records. Go listen to a great Marvin Gaye record, you know, and it'll definitely be some flat notes on any of these records, you know. But if you go back and ask Marvin, if he would have fixed it, he probably would have fixed it if he had the technology back then to fix it. But that's kind of what we love at the same time, man.
And you said something else in the green room, but I think that's a wonderful answer. But you also said something else in the green room, which I thought was so interesting on the phone the other day. If a machine is able to generate a song, theoretically by itself, whatever that means, and it elicits emotion from human beings out there, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that from a creative standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint?
Well, I think we're already there, for what it's worth. I mean, we deal with stuff every day. I would definitely say, and I remember the first time it happened, that the songs that our users are making and the songs that we make, some of them are very emotive. Some of them are very emotional. Some of them have mistakes, right? One of the reasons why Boomy songs sound so good is because we're doing rapid iterations that account for errors, right? And sometimes those errors are really cool. And it's up to our user whether or not to say, yes, that's a cool, you know, error, that's a bad error. So I think we're already there, for one. I would say, you know, the human versus, you know, not human, I'm adamant in the position that it's still all humans, even if it's a human using a computer.
It's
I would
always
ask
the
ourselves
human
whether or not
listening.
Yeah, and I would ask ourselves whether or not over time, if you start from, like, you know, a long time ago making music, has music become more or less human as there's been more of it? Is a question that I think we can answer internally that will put you on one or either side of this. But I do think there are going to be significant market changes, because people are reacting emotionally to the music that they're making. They're sharing them in new ways. And they're, you know, part of what makes a song, and this is a very important part of our thesis at Boomy, part of what makes a song something you love is the fact that you made it, right? Like that's the thing that I think is really bringing people back.
So your uncle and
that's
your mother are
really
going to love it too.
Right, and so there are songs that someone else wrote that we really love, and there are songs that we wrote that we really love, and we love them not maybe because they're great songs, but because we wrote them. I think that is the new market and the new way of thinking about this stuff, away from not necessarily a hits-driven business, but just extending the long tail by 50x. That makes opportunities, with concepts of automation applied to music creation very exciting and very fun to work.
So at the end of the day, the human issue, you can take this home with you and think about it tonight. Are we losing humanity by relying on machine-generated works that do bring emotional response from us, or are we actually tapping into our humanity more because it's just another emotional input? I would like to ask Reagan at the end of this, maybe from a copyright standpoint or maybe not, what do you think about the current status of doing business when it concerns these songs and sort of like the uncertainty about fundamental copyright issues?
I guess one thing I would want to say is, can I talk about the compendium for a second? The
Oh, yeah.
compendium is the Copyright Office's manual, and it is, used by practitioners in courts. Courts look at it, and it would get deference towards shaping law. It's what the Copyright Office looks at when we decide whether or not to register something. And it currently says we won't register works produced by a machine or a mere mechanical process. And we have published a draft that we're looking for public comment on. And the draft suggests adding the sentence that says the crucial question is whether the work is basically one of human authorship, with the computer merely assisting an instrument, or whether the traditional elements of authorship in the work, literary, artistic, or musical expression, or elements of selection, arrangement, etc., were actually conceived and executed not by man, but by a machine. And so if you have any thoughts about that, until May 14th, you can submit it through the Copyright Office website. But I wanted to say, where did we get that sentence from? It's from a report that the Copyright Office sent to Congress in 1965. So these
Already
issues
thinking about it.
have been around for a while.
So to the extent any of you people have business that, is based on songs and probably artificially generated songs at some point, it might be worth commenting. But if it's okay, we've got maybe a minute or two to take any questions that anybody might have. I see. Denise, go ahead. This is Denise Nichols, by the way.
Thank you.
Wonderful lawyer.
So my question or my comment perhaps is, I could argue, I believe, that the data that is input into artificial intelligence in and of itself is not copyrightable in its individual parts. That it is in fact data, not exactly on the same line, but Feisty rule. It's data that has been compiled, and then once it's compiled, and the algorithm is simply a set of rules that somebody has written. To me, that would not be copyrightable. That's a set of rules. And then it's taking data points and making music from it. So now I start to wonder, and I don't have any answers, but this is a great conversation that you guys are having. I just wonder if it is copyrightable in its elements before it's made into a song with some sort of human context put in there.
That's beyond my pay grade, but it does point out the issue, which is there needs to be clarity, and there may be three ways, there may be others. One, legislatively, and that's a hassle. Number two, go to court and have some judge tell you who could care less about copyright and could care less about you, or a Band-Aid approach with contractually to the extent that they're grounded properly in the law. One more question, if we got time, if you can ask it in something less than a sentence.
Just back to the work for hire issue,
Yeah.
you were talking about that. You were saying that if it's a corporation that has employees who are creating these works via machines, does that skirt around the human authorship element then, if the corporation claims the rights in that work?
Well, Reagan, you can answer that if you like.
Yeah, I mean, it will let authorship vest in a corporation through the work made for hire doctrine, but if it's done by an employee. But I don't think that the law as written now contemplates that an employee will be a computer as opposed to an employee being a person, maybe directing a computer, sure. I mean, that's the same as an employee playing a guitar that is, under the scope of employment for a motion picture company or another type of company.
But the
So would that be an
fundamental premise,
impediment then to registering it then? What,
As work,
as a work for hire, yes.
yeah, if someone says that they meet the qualifications for work made for hire, that it's created in the scope of someone's employment or meets one of the other criteria, we would accept that representation. I mean, I actually think, this will probably be a growth period of figuring out what some of these technologies are doing, but that I imagine a year or two from now we'll know a lot more than we do right now about how some of these things are actually working and how good these outputs are in terms of being used.
but to clarify just the fundamental proposition of works made for hire in the copyright statute, if I am employed by an architecture company to do blueprint drawings all day, those blueprint drawings were never mine. I was never the author. They immediately become the property of my company employer, and from inception. That's just part of the copyright law.
Sure, I understand that, but I was just getting to the matter that these are works that are not created then. I mean, that are created by machines within the scope of employment of the employees who are making them happen on these machines. I mean, it seems very, very amorphous to me as to.
But I mean, is that any different than now I work for the government, so there's no copyright interest in what I work, but say I was back at a law firm and I'm, typing on my word processing, program, that output might be owned by my law firm, right? But there's still an employee directing a machine to do something.
Clarity would help. So I think they're going to take, I see the hook over there, stage right, and we got to split. But anyway, I thank all of you for coming. I hope this was helpful. And I want to thank everybody on the panel. These people are in the trenches of these issues, and it's so helpful to have their input. So thank you.